I tell you what, man, them Y2K, man, they know when the mainframe's gonna come crashing down on that grid, man. They're like a damn apocalypse now, man. And I'm lying on the horror. The horror.
And now for something completely different.
Hey gang, it's the QuQu here. Remember that huge internet war that lasted a year and 7 months, all to save video games from a group of social justice warriors who wanted to use video to scam tax money from the public education sector, all while indoctrinating children into their poisonous ideology? Well, get ready for another huge fight like that to save the tech sector from the same kind of sociopaths, but this time, they want to destroy open source software instead. I mean, what reason could a bunch of corporate stooges have for wanting to destroy a community that provides the world with a free, as in freedom, alternative to commercial software? Well, we'll get into that a little later. Full disclosure, I work in tech, so I'm connected to just about all of this in some way. Read the Zero Hedge Disclosure Policy, I'm operating on the same principles here. Before we begin, I wanted to thank Brian Lunduke for bringing much of this to our attention, with his video, Divisive Politics Are Destroying Open Source, which I've linked in the description. His video is very informative and well-researched, and much of what I'm going to show today is information that he initially found. If only he'd accept Jesus as his Lord and Savior, maybe it'd cure his paranoia over anti-Semitism. So, on February 14th of this year, the FreeBSD Foundation revamped their code of conduct. While I fundamentally disagree with the idea of a code of conduct, since I feel that national laws kind of make them redundant, the original only had a few tumors instead of being the enormous cancerous mess that we'll be talking about soon. The original code was mostly just, don't be a dick, but the problem with this is that that rule is really subjective. As we've seen on other forums with similar rules, don't be a dick style rules can be enforced in very unfair and uneven ways, but as long as it's used sparingly, there's no huge problem. I mean, this is the FreeBSD project, it's not some shitposting Telegram server. There's a specific purpose to their organization, which they can't focus on if a bunch of people are acting like assholes all day. However, the new code of conduct does not really cultivate a productive environment where the best coders rise to the top. It seems to be written primarily for the benefit of sociopaths who have an encyclopedic knowledge of the geek feminism wiki. Let me quote a few excerpts. This code of conduct applies to all spaces used by the FreeBSD project, including our mailing lists, IRC channels, and social media, both online and off. Anyone who is found to violate this code of conduct may be sanctioned or expelled from FreeBSD project-controlled spaces at the discretion of the FreeBSD Code of Conduct Committee. The new code was written based on the Geek Feminism Wiki's example code, and several of the bullet points were taken word for word from it. Comments that reinforce systemic oppression related to gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, disability, mental illness, neurodiversity, physical appearance, body size, age, race, or religion. All these pseudo-intellectual buzzwords basically mean that only certain oppressed groups are allowed to complain about discrimination. So if you're a straight white guy, or closeted, you know, the people actually writing the code instead of busybodying with the other hens, then you can't be oppressed, because something your ancestors might have done. Unwelcome comments regarding a person's lifestyle choices and practices, including those related to food, health, parenting, drugs, and employment.
But when you say, I can't do math, that means someone else is going to have to do it for you.
Deliberate misgendering, deliberate use of dead or rejected names, gratuitous or off-topic sexual images or behavior in spaces where they're not appropriate. Physical contact and simulated physical contact, e.g. textual descriptions like hug or back rub without consent or after a request to stop? Clearly, this rule was intended to discriminate against furries, but in all seriousness, this is the end result of conceding the narrative of internet harassment to the SJWs. I mean, when you're totally as cute as I am, you get messages like that all the time. Just ignore them if you can't take it. Alright, let's see what else they're not allowing here. Threats of violence?
I will fucking destroy you!
Deliberate intimidation. Yeah, I'm sure they'll enforce that one fairly. Stalking or following. Does that include following someone on social media? But seriously, stalking someone in meat space is already illegal. It's not the FreeBSD Foundation's responsibility to handle that. Harassing photography or recording, including logging online activity for harassment purposes, as in investigative journalism. I mean, that's what actual journalism entails. Pretty much every event we've ever covered required us to do this. Sustained disruption of discussion. Unwanted sexual attention, patterns of inappropriate social contact, such as requesting or assuming inappropriate levels of intimacy with others, continued one-on-one communication after request to cease, or you could just use the block or mute button. Deliberate outing of any private aspect of a person's identity without their consent, except as necessary to protect vulnerable people from intentional abuse. What the heck kind of caveat is that? This is basically giving the progressive in-group permission to dox whoever they want. All they have to do is make up some excuse for why you're supposedly problematic. If you use the FreeBSD OS and you're not part of the cathedral, then you must assume that any information you provide will soon be public knowledge.
Donate to our Patreon, shitlord, or we're telling your boss that you visit the poll board.
Now, obviously, such a draconian code of conduct wouldn't go without some criticism. I mean, we've seen what codes of conduct have done to previous projects, and we don't want to see it kill one of the oldest projects in the history of open source. The weird Twitter goons responded to these criticisms in the manner that we've come to expect. Here's Randy Harper's insightful commentary.
I'm a white dude that doesn't understand why some people might be uncomfortable, and I don't care to learn either. Instead, I'm going to sit on my pulpit and talk about how silly people are that they don't want me to virtually touch them. Look, I don't give a flying fuck about virtual hugs, but if someone's gonna be made uncomfortable by it, why not just not do it? Why turn it into a big thing when you're super offended that someone doesn't want you to say hugs at them? Like, why? Why? Idiots. This is a good general rule. If you're going to be a part of a group made up of people from various backgrounds, and something might make someone uncomfortable, especially someone that's a minority, why the fuck would you insist on doing it? Oh, maybe it's because you're a dick. Because what you're saying is, your comfort means less to me than my ability to type hugs in IRC. And that is such a dumb shit and self-centered thing to say, and you don't deserve to be part of any project or really be allowed any part of human interaction. This dude is so upset that maybe I used harsh words with him, but he's even more upset that he's not allowed to virtually touch women that might not want to interact with him. It's okay, dude. You aren't part of FreeBSD anyways. Do you even code, bruh? Where's your commit bit? And her thread just keeps on going from there. Now, a few things about Randy's rant really pop out at me. First of all, why is most of it written in lowercase? Other than like one sentence in all caps and the word IRC, she doesn't capitalize the beginning of any of her sentences. This is just a very strange way of writing things that I've noticed that a certain group of people tend to do. Also, her Twitter name isn't consistent. It's like she doesn't want people to know who she is. Like, I understand wanting to be anonymous on the internet, but the way Randy Harper goes about it, only those within her in-group would recognize her. And these sort of habits are a pattern that you're gonna start to notice throughout the rest of the video. We have another thread here by @Geneland, also known as Benno and the Terrible Bad No Good Display Name. Yeah, I have no idea who that is, but apparently there's some big important person in the open source community. The thread starts by arguing why FreeBSD's original code of conduct wasn't good enough, which is complete bullshit, by the way. But then she gives us this little zinger. The most important part of a code of conduct is that it places the onus on you doing your best not to offend, rather than placing the onus on you not getting offended. Power dynamics being what they are, an expectation that it's your job not to get offended, means you're just entrenching the existing power structure and the potential for abuse that it represents. I mean, come on, hierarchies are a natural part of human behavior. They've been with us since the dawn of man. Power structures, as she calls them, are kind of a good thing. It's also critically important that your code acknowledges that harassment and abuse are subjective.
Geez, she wants every code of conduct to be written by fake postmodernists, someone who denies the existence of objective reality. From there, she starts talking shit about Brian Lunduke and dismissing his concerns.
Offensive and abusive behavior is often subjective, and as such, we'd investigate and respond to reports of behavior that has made people feel unwelcome or threatened as they arise and as needed. Does this help?
So again, it's starting to become clear that this code of conduct is not going to be fairly enforced at all. It was written in such a way to benefit the histrionic and those who've memorized every article on the Geek Feminism Wiki. And then Dreamland starts spurging about Brian Lunduke for several more tweets, concluding with an ASCII art picture of Brian Lunduke's tombstone? Now, obviously, this is a violation of FreeBSD's code of conduct, and the fact that Dreamland hasn't been booted off FreeBSD's controlled spaces speaks volumes about what this code of conduct is really for and who it's really meant to benefit. So even if you've never heard of Node.js, you've probably used it without even realizing it. Node.js is a runtime that lets you take the JavaScript language that everyone was taught in school and run it on the web server as well. That way, your fresh out of university diversity hires can be shoved right into writing backend code without needing to learn a new language. No, but seriously, the project is really popular, and you're virtually guaranteed to be using at least one website or app that's built on top of Node.js without even realizing it. When Rod Vag of the Node.js project tweeted out an article criticizing codes of conduct, quote, "If you've never considered the potential downsides of codes of conduct, here's a good place to start." The article was titled "The Neurodiversity Case for Free Speech." The article makes the case that speech codes on college campuses suppress people whose brains are wired a little bit different. Quote, "But censorship also kills rational culture in a less obvious way. It silences the eccentric. It discriminates against neurominorities. It imposes a chilling effect on unusual brains that house unusual minds. It marginalizes people who may have great ideas, but also happen to have mental disorders, personality quirks, eccentric beliefs, or unusual communication styles that make it hard for them to understand and follow the current speech norms that govern what is acceptable." The article was written in a sort of academic speak that sets off in-group signals for progressives. It uses words like neurotypical and neurodivergent instead of the words that everyone else uses like normal and autist, or normal and Richard Stallman. But of course, that wasn't enough to get these assholes to listen. The article was a threat to their narrative surrounding speech codes, so of course anyone sharing it needed to be punished. Because of this, there was a call for Rod Vag to be removed from the Node.js project over a tweet about a Quillette article. When he refused to step down, a vote was called to kick him out. Quote, "There are 13 members of the TSC. 10 members voted, 2 abstained, and Rod did not participate. The vote came down 60% against removing Rod from the TSC, and 60% against asking Rod to voluntarily resign. So he was allowed to stay because of only one vote. Just one vote. And because 4 exceptional snowflakes got triggered over Rod Vag, they decided to fork the Node.js project into IO? IO. That's a horrible name, and that's the second time the project's been forked. Bletchley Punk at Alice Goldfuss, whoever that is, said, "You should be paying attention to what is happening right now in the Node community. Repeated TOC violations by an authority figure went unaddressed. TSC members left, and Node has been forked." And Too Gay for This Shit at Maybe Cats said, "This mess with Node.js is a reminder that enforcement steps matter. Node has a code of conduct they just chose to not enforce. Seriously, just look at the list of things in and compare against their own code of conduct. Hey, both of these people have word salad Twitter names, just like Randy Harper. Why don't they want people to know who they are? Also, why does it appear as though their shift keys were broken when they typed their usernames? Anyway, a few days later, Node in Peace made a thread on the r/Node subreddit titled "Multiple COC Violations by Node.js board member Ashley Williams." It began, "Ashley Williams from the Node.js board has been reported for expressing dozens of sexist and racist statements over the last few years." Here are some of the tweets that Node in Peace quoted in the Reddit post.
"Never underestimate the wrath of a mildly inconvenienced white dude. And yes, it is all dudes complaining.
Blow it out your ass.
OMG, last RT, when they have the audacity to tell you to apologize. Fuck you, man, fuck you, I'm not sorry. Remember how you thought that white dudes conflating their opportunity with merit in tech was awful? Literally the same thing in capitalism. Kill all men. When I told all of Boku to buy Miss Andry shirts, LOL.
It's time to stop!
I get mad almost every day about how we sterilize male animals in the wild, but insist that human women take birth control, not human men.
We didn't just have some female speakers or some underrepresented speakers or speakers of color. We had a majority of them. In fact, if you were a white dude and you wanted to talk at the conference, your chances were basically nil.
In response to the controversy regarding Rod Vag's Twitter post, she said,
There are a lot of good takes in response to this tweet, but I have one that's a bit more personal. Rod and his constant unproductive criticism of social policies in Node is why I've drastically lessened my participation in the project. I know for sure that his actions have also affected the participation of many other contributors and would-be contributors. I've urged the project on several occasions to deal with this. I hope the attention this received helped drive this sorely needed action. Beyond what he has done to the health of the project, he also has specifically engaged in targeted harassment against me personally. Because of his unrestrained antagonism towards me, I often have to have others speak on my behalf to sidestep his derailing responses. This has made it very difficult for me to fulfill my duties as individual membership director, and I have deep guilt about this. I had tweeted about this a long time ago, but was punished by the board for publicly criticizing the project, so I was forced to stop. However, I want what's best for Node, and I think making this public is one of the only ways to incite action.
and she continued this charade as the months went on, thanking multiple contributors for leaving the Node project, and whining about how the majority of the Node board didn't want Rod Vag kicked off the team for wrongthink.
For the record, I want a community where everyone is held accountable to the same standard, and that includes me.
But they did not hold her accountable for her actions. Not only was she not reprimanded, but she later joined the core team for Rust, where she'll fit right in. What better place for an underachiever than a language that assumes you're too dumb to comprehend memory management? So, more recently, Google adopted a code of conduct written by a satanic transsexual woman of hair color named Coraline Ada. Google now explicitly recommends that their engineers adopt the so-called Contributor Covenant when releasing their code as open source. This Coraline individual has a history of demanding open source projects adopt her code of conduct, regardless of how much or how little she has contributed to the project. And now one of the largest tech companies in the world has adopted her code of conduct for their open source developers. The Coraline Ada story begins with an incident called Opalgate, involving the Opal project for cross-compiling Ruby scripts into JavaScript. On July 17th of 2015, Eliosquito, the most prolific contributor to the Opal project, tweeted out an article regarding Rachel Dolezal titled, "Your Race, Your Sex, Your Choice." This prompted a short discussion with another Twitter user named Curtis, where Elia posted the following. "That kind of incoherence is particularly dear to me as the Italian government is passing laws that will introduce sexual gender education for kids, even under 4 years old." Then another user, Aston J, asks, "What issues in particular, Elia? Education is usually a good thing. Look at the Nordic countries. Teen pregnancies, lowest in the EU. Elia responds, "The video is there to explain how gender teachings are purely ideological and detached from reality." The next day, Coraline Ada made a complaint on Opal's GitHub page regarding Elia's tweets, titled, "Transphobic maintainer should be removed from project."
Eliosquito is publicly calling trans people out for not accepting reality on Twitter. His Twitter profile mentions that he is a core contributor to Opal. Is this what the other maintainers want to be reflected in the project? Will any transgender developers feel comfortable contributing?
Now keep in mind, Coraline Ada was in no way involved with the Opal project, and she wasn't tagged into Elia's Twitter conversation. She manufactured this controversy without even contributing to the project itself. Besides, Elia is obviously not a native English speaker contributor, and honestly, most NatSoc circles don't consider Italians to be white. Aaliyah just wants to keep his children from being brainwashed into believing that the big pharmaceutical companies have magic transformation pills. Anyway, a contributor by the name of Meh responds to Coraline with, "If you want him removed, start working on Opal and contributing as much as him to everything he did for Opal. So we have a replacement that's more in orientation with your morals and views. Pro tip, you won't because you can't." Also, to elaborate more on that, Opal is a technology. Technology is moral-less. If a transgender contributor appeared, Aaliyah's views wouldn't even appear in here. Because why would anyone care? Bring contributions. They will be accepted with open arms. Bring morals and politics in here, and you will be shown the metaphorical door. Now, Meh told his own side of the story on his blog, linked below if you want to read the whole post, but I want to highlight a section of it to show his motivations. I don't read what Aaliyah said on Twitter because I don't care. All I care about is having some fun and testing out my theory that an SJW shitstorm can be abused to increase the popularity of a project positively. First, I needed the spark to light the fire. So I just say what I wished the owners and authors of the many projects hit by purple hairs I've always read about on G would say. If you could do anything worthwhile, you would. Now contribute or get the fuck out. Soon afterwards, a bunch of rando people who only seem to care about rainbow flag issues showed up to complain about this decision. I have no idea how they found the thread, unless it was linked in some private DM group somewhere.
As a queer person, this sort of argument from a maintainer makes me feel unwelcome. The ignorance which Aaliyah showed when claiming that trans folk are not accepting reality is actively harmful. I will not contribute to this project or any other project which Aaliyah maintains.
A postmodern masterpiece.
Damn, I found out about this project thanks to this issue, and it's super relevant to my interests. But not gonna come near it with the 1,000-foot pole if these are the people I'd have to interact with. Hello, fellow software engineers. I would totally be interested in helping out with this Opal thingy, but I won't because you let this disgusting shitlord white male cishet touch it. You cannot separate people from the technology they create or the technology they use ever. It is not possible. I cannot work with people if they bring to the table with them the idea that I, as a human, am wrong about who I fundamentally am at my core. This isn't about someone's political views. It's about him not seeing some people as even being human. Well, that's a load of bullshit. I used RiserFS as my main file system for years. This is not respect right now. So it's obvious that we will not be treated with respect. You want to talk about respect? You barge into another project and demand that they fire a prolific contributor for bad things without putting any work into it. Of course they're not going to show you respect. Respect is earned, not freely given. And it just went on and on from there. It was so bad I could make an entire video about this incident alone. What do you think? Should I make a video about Opalgate? Anyway, it ended up being the longest thread in the history of GitHub, locked by Adam Bainon after 374 posts of heated debate. Adam Bainon is no longer an active contributor to the Opal project, but as a result of this weird coordinated ticket system shaming attempt, the Opal project did adopt a code of conduct. They didn't adopt Coraline Ada's contributor covenant, which Coraline and her clique continued to shill for during the drafting process, but instead adopted one written in-house. But why is this code of conduct thing even something that project maintainers need to concern themselves with? It should be obvious how to behave on a project with goals. The project manager should be able to tell who and what are advancing the project towards its goals, and who and what are not, and accept or reject contributions and contributors based off of that alone. It's almost like talentless hacks want a foot in the door. Like they want all that time that they spent learning how to speak the pidgin dialect of English that people of hair color speak to be worth something. Like they want knowledge of the progressive stack alone to be a carte blanche license to inflict suffering, to give them a leg up over the people who spent that time learning to architect good software instead. Regardless, this is just one instance of Coraline Ada's contributor covenant clique invading an open source project, and now Google, one of the largest tech companies in the world, just adopted her code of conduct. Speaking of Coraline Ada, do you know one thing that Coraline hates?
Meritocracy. In fact, they wrote an entire manifesto on why meritocracy should be abandoned as an idea. Although oddly enough, the idea of abandoning meritocracy has been a rather popular idea, predating even Coraline's manifesto. Heck, even GitHub removed a rug with the phrase United Meritocracy of GitHub from the lobby of their San Francisco HQ in 2014. Meritocracy is considered a toxic idea by these histrionic invaders for obvious reasons. First of all, hiring the most qualified person who applies for a job has failed to produce their equal representation utopia. Although, oddly enough, people from India and China are way overrepresented in tech for some reason. Since meritocracy fails to produce their desired outcomes, it has to go. So companies will be forced to hire more people whose main contribution to open source is writing queer memoirs. We can use this hatred of meritocracy as a tool, however. We can tell how far gone a project is by how much it abandons meritocratic principles. Remember, nobody has ever managed to socially engineer equality of outcome. Anyone saying that they're the one who will finally manage it is either a snake oil merchant trying to sell you something, or a utopian thinker, also known as an imbecile. I know that many of you have dropped Mozilla software after Brendan Eich stepped down as CEO, after they donated $100,000 to Rise Up, and after they promised to combat supposed fake news across the web, but on the off chance that you're one of the few who still uses Firefox, since it's one of the default browsers for many Linux distributions, here's yet another reason to switch to another browser. Patrick Finch, a strategist at Mozilla, opened a thread on the Mozilla Governance Google group titled Proposal, addressing the term meritocracy in the governance statement. It begins with, "As part of our work on diversity and inclusion within Mozilla communities, Emma Irwin and I have a proposal to re-articulate the main principle of Mozilla's governance statement. This proposal does not seek to change how Mozilla is governed, only how we talk about how Mozilla is governed, which may reasonably be regarded as contentious." Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. Of course telling your contributors that they're going to be replaced by indentured servants from Albonia waiting for their green cards is gonna piss them off. He continues, "Issue. The first line of Mozilla's governance states, Mozilla is an open source project governed as a meritocracy. The use of the term meritocracy to describe communities that suffer from a lack of diverse representation is increasingly seen as problematic. It proceeds from an assumption of equality of opportunity. There is now quite substantial evidence, as well as opinion, that we should challenge this usage. Look, on the internet, no one can know that you're a dog, or a waff, or a puka. If their coding is well written and they speak the same language, their patches will be accepted. This is just some kind of warped version of socialist class theory. The purpose behind this is to force everyone to attach their name and their face to everything that they do and say online, so that you can follow them into IRL spaces. But to force that would destroy the very fabric of the internet." Patrick then tries to argue that, quote, "meritocratic principles remain highly desirable and should be explicit, but I'm not buying it. We know nothing about these outreach programs or who will be supervising them. It sounds like something that was written to give the appearance of a compromise." He summarizes the proposed new governance principle as such. Mozilla is an open source project. Our community is structured as a virtual organization. Authority is primarily distributed to both volunteer and employed community members as they show their ability through contributions to the project. The project also seeks to debias this system of distributing authority through active interventions that engage and encourage participation from diverse communities. What does he mean by active interventions that engage and encourage participation from diverse communities? Well, I have one theory. You see, these progressive feminists believe that the reason why men are more interested in software development than women is not due to inherent biological differences, but because of supposed patriarchal oppression which discourages them from entering the field. It's not that women as a whole are more geared towards nurturing and caregiving tasks, while men as a whole are more geared towards building things. Progressives believe that men and women are the same on the inside, which a simple observation of reality disproves. Regardless, when I hear intervention program, I think of things like the ADA initiative, which got such a reputation for stirring up drama around false sexual harassment claims that it made people afraid to mentor women in tech. And rumor has it that as a result of such efforts, Linus Torvalds, the creator of the Linux kernel, now follows the Mike Pence rule. So basically, these intervention programs are just a complete waste of money. A good chunk of women are just never going to be interested in doing actual software development no matter how much you sugarcoat it. And the few exceptions will only be turned off by this sort of watering down of the field. And honestly, with Silicon Valley slowly reinventing feudalism, I can't say I blame the ladies for wanting to stay away from that. R.O. responds to Patrick with strong arguments against changing the government statement, but Patrick just dismisses his concerns. R.O. remains unconvinced. Quote, I worry that saying we have to abandon meritocracy as a value, given the general understanding of that word, to promote diversity and inclusion sends the wrong messages. First, that the people the project is trying to reach will never be able to participate on a level playing field with existing contributors, which is horribly condescending and factually not true. Second, that Mozilla is lowering its standards in any way. That's what some people will believe, and like it or not, it affects the perception of the project. The thread is still technically ongoing as of writing this, but it's slowed down somewhat since it was created. No actual change has been made to Mozilla's governance statement yet, and we'll keep you posted in the event that something changes. From your iPhone's throttling and planned obsolescence, to breathalyzers with enough code flaws to lead to false convictions, to ridiculous DRM schemes that destroy your hardware, one man foresaw it all in the 1970s and early 80s. Richard Stallman's encounter with a stubbornly jamming Xerox printer, and the manufacturer's refusal to allow him to tinker with the driver source code, led him to the philosophy that all source code should be publicly available for tinkering. And one thing led to another, concluding with the creation of the open source movement. And while his solutions may seem a bit on the wild side, he had correctly identified the cause of a whole host of problems that we're facing to this very day. But how do people whose main weapon is shame get at someone who seems to completely lack normal social inhibitions? Just recently, Raymond Nicholson and Zach Weinberg removed a joke from the GNU C library manual, which was written back in the 1990s. Richard Stallman, the joke's writer, said that, quote, a GNU manual, like A Course in History, is not meant to be a safe space. He suggested the possibility of adding a trigger warning about functions that create child processes, since childbirth is far more traumatic than having an abortion, and he stood firm in his decision to keep the original joke. The joke in question was in the documentation for the abort function, which had the following footer. Future change warning. Proposed federal censorship regulations may prohibit us from giving you information about the possibility of calling this function. We would be required to say that it is not an acceptable way of terminating a program. Now, I'm going to set aside my own views on abortion for a moment. Objectively speaking, this joke is very much in favor of the pro-choice view. It's a joke that agrees with the progressive worldview regarding reproductive laws. So they want a joke, one that they would have easily agreed with when it was written, to be censored. And it's not just a joke, it's an important piece of GNU history that, regardless of whether or not we agree with it or find it funny, should stay in the manual. Later, William Pitcock started ranting on Twitter about how you should stop giving money to the Free Software Foundation because of this, and that abortion jokes are the reason why women avoid computer science like the plague. This is, of course, ignoring the biological differences that we went over earlier. William wrote a lengthy email giving this huge sob story, boo-hoo, about how he used to support the Free Software Foundation and GNU when he was younger. Quote, when you do things like this, you push people away from contributing to GNU projects. When you then later declare unilateral control of the GNU project to keep a joke that is, frankly, not funny at all, and trivially interpreted in a way that is offensive to those we care about, all it does is motivate me to create new free software replacements to GNU software, with a governance model that guarantees that there is no dictator at the top. Yes, remove the joke, or we're going to make our own software, with blackjack and hookers. But really, this sort of no fun allowed mentality is the real cause of contributors being driven away from open source. If this keeps up, if these sociopaths keep taking over more and more projects, all the real contributors who do the actual work will be driven away, and the open source community will collapse. This will result in two negative consequences. First, it will give big monolithic companies like Microsoft and Apple complete control over the software market. They'll be free to do whatever shitty business practices they want, in addition to the ones that they currently do. Without the open source community, users will have no alternatives to their software releases. Right now, Microsoft has stated that they will ban users from their services, including products such as Microsoft Word, if the user is in violation of their wrongthink policies. And they just bought GitHub. Can you imagine if the only alternative to Microsoft Word was Google Documents? Dan and I wouldn't even be able to make videos like this. He worked on the script in an open source text editor. He uses green as my pepper for photo manipulation parts. Without open source software, this video that you're watching right now could not exist. The second result will be the breakdown of critical infrastructure. Already, we're beginning to see this in meat space, with entire buildings being condemned because they were constructed decades ago and no one alive knows how to repair them. The same will happen to the computer infrastructure if the open source community dies. So I want you to imagine this scenario. Open source dies and older open source operating systems become incompatible with new hardware. You're kicked off of Windows for making a joke about killing terrorists in Counter-Strike, and Apple products are only used by people with lowercase word salads for Twitter usernames who pay $10 to post on internet forums.
You know, one day you're going to work for a living, and you're not going to like people with their hands in your
Charlotte, get the $10 out of my purse.
By this point, all that will be left is Temple OS.
So Elon Musk, the Commodore 64 was sold in quantity of 20 million. Then they made computers for niggers. The Commodore was for nerdy white programmers who wanted to, or nerdy white kids who wanted to get their hands on computers when they were fresh and new. That's where the best programmers started out. It's gone downhill. The Commodore, if you get the user's manual for the Commodore, it's not your average computer today. Basically, it starts out with basic programming and how to make little games, and you type programs in out of magazines, and that was the scene. And so what this is for is this is for your white boy kids, basically. You know, you can throw your kids on there. It's for parents of white boy kids, you know, scientists. Eventually, I plan to get a computer made. Since I have the backing of God, I don't have the funding of God at this point, but I got the backing of God.